The wind howled through the Rocky Mountain peaks like a banshee's cry, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of another harsh winter. Jacob Bear Morrison pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his massive frame as he descended the treacherous mountain trail, his boots crunching against the frost-covered stones. For 15 years, he had called these mountains home, living as a mountain man, trapping beaver and trading pelts with the occasional passing wagon train. His only companions were the wildlife and his trusted rifle, a beautiful Hawken that had saved his life more times than he could count. But loneliness was a cold companion, colder than any mountain winter. At 42, Jacob's weathered face bore the lines of a man who had seen too many sunrises alone. His thick beard, streaked with premature gray, couldn't hide the sadness in his deep blue eyes. The silence of the mountains, once his sanctuary, had become his prison. He craved something he had never allowed himself to want: companionship, warmth, perhaps even love. As he approached the small frontier town of Cedar Falls, nestled in the valley below, Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. Today was the day he would change his life forever. Word had reached him through a traveling merchant about a peculiar arrangement, a mail-order bride situation, but with a twist. The woman was older, past her prime, they said, and desperate enough to accept any man willing to take her. The price? His most precious possession, his rifle. Hey there, friend. Before we continue with Jacob's incredible journey, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying this tale of love in the Old West. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I always love hearing from folks all across the country who appreciate a good story. The town of Cedar Falls was barely more than a collection of weathered wooden buildings, clustered around a single dirt road. The saloon, general store, and church stood like sentinels against the wilderness, their windows glowing warmly in the afternoon light. Jacob tied his horse to the hitching post outside Murphy's general store, his hands trembling slightly as he dismounted. The weight of his rifle across his back felt heavier than usual, as if it knew its fate. Inside the store, the familiar smells of tobacco, leather, and coffee beans greeted him. Patrick Murphy, a stout Irishman with kind eyes, looked up from behind the counter. "Well, I'll be damned, Bear Morrison, as I live and breathe. What brings you down from your mountain fortress?" Jacob removed his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. "I've come about the arrangement, Murphy, the woman you mentioned." Murphy's expression grew serious. He glanced around the store, ensuring they were alone, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Ah, you mean Eleanor. Poor lass has been waiting for months now. Well, she's not what most men would call a catch, Bear. She's 40 years old, never been married, and—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's had a hard life. Are you certain about this?" Jacob's jaw tightened with determination. "I'm certain. Where is she?" "She's staying at the boarding house, room 3 upstairs." "But Bear," Murphy grabbed his arm as he turned to leave, "she's expecting to meet her husband tonight. The arrangement is that you'll be wed immediately. No courtship, no getting to know each other. It's a business transaction, nothing more. You give me that rifle of yours, and she becomes your wife. Are you prepared for that?" The rifle felt like it was burning against Jacob's back. This weapon had been his father's, passed down when Jacob was just 17 and heading west to make his fortune. It had fed him, protected him, been his constant companion through countless dangers. But what good was survival if you had no one to share your life with? I'm prepared, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Murphy nodded solemnly and extended his hand. Then let's make this official. With hands that shook like autumn leaves, Jacob unslung his rifle and placed it on the counter. The Hawkins' polished wood stock gleamed in the lamplight, its brass fittings catching the glow like captured sunlight. He traced his fingers along the barrel one last time, remembering the countless dawns he had watched through its sights. The meals it had provided, the predators it had driven away. She's a beauty, Murphy said softly, examining the rifle with the reverence it deserved. Your father would be proud that you're choosing love over survival. I hope so, Jacob replied, though his voice cracked with emotion. The boarding house stood at the end of the main street, a two-story structure with a wraparound porch and lace curtains in every window. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietress, was a matronly woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She looked Jacob up and down with obvious disapproval. You must be the mountain man, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Eleanor is upstairs, room 3. She's been preparing all day. I do hope you'll treat her with kindness, Mr. Morrison. She's been through enough heartache for one lifetime. Jacob climbed the narrow staircase, each step feeling like he was ascending to his own execution. The floorboards creaked under his weight, announcing his approach. He paused outside room 3, his hand raised to knock, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain the entire boarding house could hear it. What was he doing? He was a mountain man, rough and uncivilized, trading his most precious possession for a woman he had never seen. What if she was repulsed by him? What if he couldn't provide for her the way she deserved? What if this was the biggest mistake of his life? But loneliness was a fiercer enemy than any bear or mountain lion he had ever faced. He knocked. "Come in," came a soft voice from within. Jacob turned the handle and stepped into the dimly lit room. Heavy curtains blocked most of the afternoon sunlight, casting everything in shadows. He could make out a figure sitting on the edge of the bed, but her face was hidden in the darkness. "Eleanor?" he asked, his voice rough with nervousness. "Yes," she replied, and he could hear the tremor in her voice that matched his own. "You must be Jacob. I wasn't sure you would come." "I gave my word," he said, stepping further into the room, but keeping his distance. "And I always keep my word." They sat in awkward silence for several minutes, two strangers bound together by desperation and hope. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "I know what they've told you about me," she said, her voice barely audible. "That I'm old, that I'm not attractive, that no man would want me except out of pity or convenience. I want you to know that I don't expect love from this arrangement. I only ask for kindness and respect." Jacob's heart clenched at the pain in her voice. "Ma'am, I'm not exactly a prize myself. I've lived alone in the mountains for 15 years. I don't know how to talk to people anymore, especially women. I can't promise you love either, but I can promise you'll never want for food or shelter, and I'll treat you with all the respect you deserve." "Thank you," she whispered. The preacher arrived as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the boarding house parlor. Reverend Williams was a thin man, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He had performed many unusual weddings in his time on the frontier, but this one seemed to weigh heavily on his heart. "Are you both certain about this union?" he asked, looking between Jacob and Eleanor, who still remained in the shadows. "We are," they replied in unison. The ceremony was brief and simple. Eleanor kept her face turned away from the lamplight, and Jacob respected her privacy, though his curiosity was eating him alive. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob gently took Eleanor's hand. It was small and soft, with long, delicate fingers that spoke of a genteel upbringing. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend William said softly. Eleanor turned her face up toward Jacob, but the room was too dark for him to see her features clearly. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, surprised by their softness and the way she trembled at his touch. After the preacher left and the boarding house grew quiet, Jacob and Eleanor found themselves alone in the small room that would be their bridal chamber. The awkwardness between them was palpable. Two strangers now bound together for life. "I should light the lamp," Jacob said, moving toward the bedside table. "No," Eleanor said quickly, then caught herself. "I mean, could we perhaps wait? I'm not ready for you to see me clearly." "Not yet." Jacob's hand froze on the lamp. He understood her fear. He felt it too. In the darkness, they could both pretend to be something they weren't. In the light, there would be no hiding from reality. "Of course," he said gently, "we have all the time in the world." They talked through the night, their voices soft in the darkness. Eleanor told him about her life in Boston, how she had been a governess for wealthy families until her employer's wife became jealous of the attention Eleanor received from the husband. She had been dismissed without references, her reputation ruined by whispered accusations. With no family and no prospects, she had answered an advertisement for mail-order brides, desperate for a new start. Jacob shared his own story, how he had come west as a young man seeking adventure and fortune, how he had gradually retreated further and further into the mountains as civilization encroached on his solitude. He told her about the long, lonely winters, the simple pleasures of mountain life, and his growing realization that survival without companionship was merely existing, not living. As dawn approached, they had grown comfortable with each other's voices, if not yet with each other's presence. Eleanor had a musical laugh and a quick wit that surprised and delighted Jacob. She was educated and well-read, able to discuss literature and philosophy with an intelligence that impressed him. For her part, Eleanor found Jacob to be far more thoughtful and articulate than she had expected from a mountain man. His stories of life in the wilderness painted him as a man of courage and integrity. When the first rays of sunlight began to creep through the curtains, Eleanor grew quiet. "Jacob," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. I'm not what you might expect. The people in town, they've been kind enough not to stare, but I know what they think when they look at me." Jacob sat up in the chair where he had spent the night, giving her the bed out of respect. "Eleanor, whatever you think is wrong with you, it can't be worse than what's wrong with me. I'm a rough man who's forgotten how to live among civilized people. I smell like pine trees and wood smoke. My hands are permanently stained from trapping, and I haven't had a proper conversation with another human being in months before tonight." "But you're a good man," she said. "I can hear it in your voice, in the way you've treated me with such gentleness and respect. You could have demanded your husbandly rights, but instead you've given me time and space. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." The sunlight grew stronger, and Jacob knew the moment of truth was approaching. Soon, they would have to face each other in the full light of day, and whatever illusions they had built in the darkness would be shattered by reality. "Eleanor," he said, standing up and moving toward the window, "I think it's time." She was quiet for a long moment. Then he heard the rustle of fabric as she stood up from the bed. "Yes," she said. her voice barely a whisper. "I suppose it is." Jacob turned around slowly, and as the morning sunlight streamed through the window and illuminated Eleanor's face for the first time, he felt his breath catch in his throat. The woman standing before him was not the aged, unattractive spinster he had been expecting. Instead, he found himself looking at one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. Eleanor had auburn hair that caught the sunlight like spun copper, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Her skin was pale and smooth, with just a few faint lines around her green eyes that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. Her features were delicate and refined, with high cheekbones and full lips that were currently trembling with nervousness. She was tall and graceful, with a figure that her simple dress couldn't hide. But it was her eyes that truly took Jacob's breath away. They were the color of emeralds, bright and intelligent, but filled with such vulnerability and fear that it made his heart ache. She was looking at him with the expression of someone expecting rejection, someone who had been told too many times that she wasn't good enough. "Dear God," Jacob whispered, his voice hoarse with shock. "You're beautiful." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, and she took a step backward. "Please don't mock me," she said, her voice breaking. "I know what I am. I know why no man wanted me until now." Jacob moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a frightened deer. "Eleanor, I'm not mocking you. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever laid eyes on. I don't understand why you were told otherwise, but whoever said those things to you was either blind or cruel." Tears began to flow down Eleanor's cheeks. "You don't understand," she said. "In Boston, I was considered plain at best. The other governesses were younger, prettier. The wives of my employers saw me as a threat, even though I would never." "Look at me," Jacob said, gently taking her hands in his. "Really look at me. I'm a mountain man who hasn't seen civilization in months. My beard is unkempt, my clothes are rough, and I probably smell like the wilderness. If anyone should be ashamed of their appearance, it's me. But you're like something out of a fairy tale." Eleanor searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, but found only honest amazement and growing affection. "You really mean it," she said wonderingly. "I've never meant anything more in my life," Jacob replied. "Eleanor, I came down from that mountain expecting to trade my rifle for companionship, nothing more. I thought I was making a practical arrangement with a woman who needed security as much as I needed company. But looking at you now, I feel like I've been given a gift I don't deserve." The fear in Eleanor's eyes began to fade, replaced by something that looked like hope. "Jacob, there's something else you should know. The reason I was really dismissed from my last position, it wasn't just jealousy. My employer's husband did try to, he made advances. When I refused him, he told his wife that I had tried to seduce him. She believed him, of course. She had me thrown out with nothing but the clothes on my back and a reputation in ruins." Jacob's jaw tightened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "That man was a fool and a scoundrel. Any man who would force himself on a woman, especially one under his protection, deserves to be horsewhipped. And his wife was a fool for believing his lies." "You don't think less of me?" Eleanor asked. "Less of you?" Jacob shook his head in amazement. "Eleanor, you stood up to a powerful man who could have ruined you, and did. You chose your honor over your security. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done in these mountains." For the first time since he had entered the room, Eleanor smiled. It was a radiant expression that transformed her already beautiful face into something luminous. Jacob felt his heart skip a beat, and he realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with his wife. "I have a confession to make," Eleanor said, her cheeks flushing pink. "When I agreed to this arrangement, I was terrified that my husband would be cruel or rough. But you've been nothing but kind and gentle. And now, seeing you in the daylight—" She paused, her blush deepening. "You're not at all what I expected either." Jacob looked down at himself self-consciously. "I'm afraid I'm exactly what you'd expect from a mountain man." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You're handsome, Jacob. Ruggedly handsome, yes, but handsome nonetheless. Your eyes are the most beautiful shade of blue I've ever seen, like mountain lakes. Your hands—" She looked down at their joined hands. "They're strong and capable, but gentle. I feel safe with you." They stood there in the morning sunlight, really seeing each other for the first time, and Jacob felt something shift inside his chest. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so many years was beginning to fade, replaced by something warm and hopeful. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I know this started as a business arrangement, but I'd like to ask you something." "What is it?" "Would you be willing to let this become something more? Would you be willing to let me court you properly, even though we're already married? I want to earn your affection, not just expect it because of a piece of paper." Eleanor's smile grew even brighter. "I would like that very much, Jacob. I would like that very much indeed." They spent the morning walking through Cedar Falls, Jacob proudly introducing Eleanor as his wife to anyone they met. The townspeople's reactions ranged from surprise to outright shock. Clearly, they had expected something very different from the mountain man's mail-order bride. Eleanor handled their stares and whispers with grace and dignity, her head held high and her hand resting confidently on Jacob's arm. At the general store, Murphy's jaw dropped when he saw Eleanor. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, then quickly apologized for his language. "Begging your pardon, ma'am? It's just, you're not quite what I was expecting." "So I've been told," Eleanor replied with a wry smile. "I hope you're not disappointed in the trade, Mr. Murphy." Murphy looked at Jacob's rifle hanging behind the counter, then at the beautiful woman on Jacob's arm, and shook his head in amazement. "I think Bear got the better end of this deal, if you don't mind me saying so." Jacob squeezed Eleanor's hand. "I couldn't agree more." They purchased supplies for the journey back to Jacob's mountain cabin, warm clothes for Eleanor, food and other necessities. As they shopped, Jacob found himself stealing glances at his wife, still hardly able to believe his good fortune. Eleanor caught him looking several times and blushed prettily, but she didn't seem displeased by his attention. "Jacob," she said, as they loaded their purchases onto his horse, "tell me about your home. What should I expect?" Jacob's expression grew serious. "It's not much, Eleanor. It's a one-room cabin, about a day's ride up into the mountains. It's warm and dry, but it's rough living. There's no luxury, no convenience. The nearest neighbor is probably 50 miles away. Are you sure you're prepared for that kind of isolation?" Eleanor considered this carefully. "I've lived in cities all my life, surrounded by people who judged me and found me wanting. The idea of being alone with someone who sees me as beautiful, that doesn't sound like isolation to me. That sounds like paradise." Jacob felt his heart swell with emotion. "You might change your mind when winter comes and we're snowed in for months at a time. Then we'll have plenty of time to get to know each other better. Eleanor replied with a smile that made Jacob's pulse quicken. The journey to Jacob's cabin took them through some of the most spectacular scenery Eleanor had ever seen. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew thinner and cleaner, scented with pine and wildflowers. Eagles soared overhead, and they spotted deer grazing in distant meadows. Eleanor rode behind Jacob on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, marveling at the beauty of the wilderness that would be her new home. "It's magnificent," she breathed as they paused at a picnic that showed the valley spread out below them like a green carpet. "I never imagined anything could be so beautiful." "Wait until you see it in autumn," Jacob said, turning in the saddle to look at her. "The aspens turn gold, and the whole mountainside looks like it's on fire. And in winter, when the snow covers everything, it's like living in a crystal palace." "Will you teach me about this place?" Eleanor asked. "About the plants and animals, about how to survive here?" "If you want to learn, I'll teach you everything I know," Jacob promised. They reached the cabin just as the sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jacob's home was indeed simple, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney and a small porch overlooking a crystal-clear stream. But it was well-built and welcoming, with flower boxes under the windows and a vegetable garden beside the house. "You have flowers," Eleanor said in surprise, as Jacob helped her down from the horse. Jacob looked embarrassed. I like having something beautiful to look at. It gets lonely up here." Eleanor walked over to the flower boxes and gently touched the blooms, mountain wildflowers that Jacob had carefully transplanted. "They're lovely, and the garden is so well tended. You're full of surprises, Jacob Morrison." Inside, the cabin was sparse, but clean and comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a comfortable chair and small table nearby. The kitchen area was simple but functional, and a large bed covered with warm quilts occupied the far corner. Everything was neat and organized, showing Jacob's careful attention to his home. "It's perfect," Eleanor said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It's exactly what a mountain home should be." Jacob lit the fireplace and began preparing dinner while Eleanor explored her new home. She examined his small collection of books, mostly practical volumes on trapping and survival, but also a few works of literature that surprised her. She touched his few personal possessions with gentle curiosity. A photograph of his parents, a carved wooden box that held his few treasures, a harmonica that showed signs of frequent use. "You play music?" she asked, holding up the harmonica. "A little," Jacob admitted. "It helps pass the long winter evenings." "Would you play something for me?" Jacob took the harmonica with hands that trembled slightly. He had never played for another person before. But as he began a soft, melancholy tune that echoed through the cabin, Eleanor's face lit up with delight. "That's beautiful," she said when he finished. "What is it?" "Just something I made up," Jacob replied, embarrassed by her praise. "I'm not very good." "You're wrong," Eleanor said firmly. "You're very good. Will you teach me to play?" "You want to learn?" "I want to learn everything about your life here, Jacob. I want to be a true partner to you, not just a burden you have to care for." They ate dinner by the fireplace, talking softly as the flames danced and the mountain night settled around them. Eleanor told Jacob more about her life in Boston, about the books she loved and the dreams she had harbored. Jacob shared stories of his years in the mountains, the challenges and the simple pleasures of his solitary life. As the evening grew late, they both became aware of the sleeping arrangements. There was only one bed, and despite being married, they were still essentially strangers. "I can sleep on the floor," Jacob offered, but Eleanor shook her head. "We're husband and wife," she said softly. "And I trust you, Jacob. I know you won't do anything I'm not ready for." They lay in the darkness, side by side but not touching, listening to the sounds of the mountain night. The hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf, the whisper of wind through the pines. Gradually, Eleanor's breathing grew deep and even as she fell asleep. But Jacob lay awake, marveling at the turn his life had taken. Just yesterday, he had been a lonely mountain man with nothing but his rifle and his solitude. Tonight, he lay beside the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, a woman who was his wife, who had chosen to trust him with her safety and her future. He had traded his most precious possession for what he thought would be mere companionship, but instead, he had found something infinitely more valuable. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Jacob Morrison smiled for the first time in years, his heart full of hope for the future he would build with Eleanor in their mountain paradise. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Jacob's life. True to his word, he courted Eleanor properly, treating her with the respect and tenderness she deserved. Every morning, he brought her wildflowers from the meadows. Every evening, they sat by the fire and talked, sharing their thoughts and dreams. Gradually, the formal distance between them melted away, replaced by genuine affection and growing love. Eleanor proved to be a quick learner and an eager student of mountain life. Jacob taught her to identify edible plants, to read the signs of changing weather, to fish in the crystal streams. She learned to cook over the open fire, to preserve meat and vegetables for the winter, to mend clothes and make soap from animal fat and lye. But Eleanor brought her own gifts to their partnership. She organized Jacob's chaotic collection of supplies, creating a system that made their small home more efficient. She taught him to read and write better, sharing her love of literature by reading aloud in the evenings. Her presence transformed the cabin from a mere shelter into a true home, filled with laughter and warmth. One evening, as they sat by the fire, with Eleanor reading from a book of poetry, Jacob reached over and gently took her hand. She looked up at him with those beautiful green eyes, and he saw his own feelings reflected there. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I love you," he said simply. "I know we agreed this would start as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became so much more. You've brought light into my life, and I can't imagine living without you anymore." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. "Oh, Jacob," she whispered, "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you were so gentle and patient with me. And every day since then, I've loved you more." Jacob leaned forward and kissed her, and this time it wasn't the awkward kiss of strangers, but the passionate embrace of two people who had found their perfect match. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I have something for you," Jacob said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden carving, a delicate flower that he had been working on in secret for weeks. "Jacob, it's beautiful," Eleanor said, cradling the carving in her hands. "You made this for me?" "I wanted to give you something beautiful, something that would last longer than the wildflowers I pick for you each morning." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck and kissed him again. "I love it. I love you. And Jacob, I'm ready to be your wife in every way." Their wedding night, weeks after their actual wedding, was everything that first night in the boarding house had not been. They came together with love and tenderness, two souls who had found their perfect complement. In the warm glow of the firelight, with the mountain wind singing outside their windows, Jacob and Eleanor Morrison began their true life together. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, just as Jacob had promised, Eleanor marveled at the beauty of her new world. She had found not just a husband, but a true partner, a man who saw her beauty both inside and out. And Jacob had discovered that sometimes the best trades are the ones that seem impossible. Trading a rifle for a bride, loneliness for love, survival for truly living. The mountain man, who had trembled when the light revealed his bride's beauty, now trembled for an entirely different reason, with the overwhelming joy of a man who had found his heart's desire in the most unexpected place. And as the first snows of winter began to dust the peaks around their cabin, Jacob and Eleanor Morrison settled in for a season of love and contentment, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other everything they had ever dreamed of, and more. Their love story would become legend in the small frontier towns below. The tale of the mountain man who traded his most precious possession for a mail-order bride, and discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as the most ordinary transactions. But for Jacob and Eleanor, it was simply the beginning of a lifetime of love in their mountain paradise, where every sunrise brought new reasons to be grateful for the day that changed both their lives forever.